good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, depending on when you are watching us. Today we are going to be discussing very important topics in this HI forum. This HI forum was put together by the Ministry of Labor of Equatorial Guinea, the Ministry of Public Functions and Administrative Reforms, IQ Farm and IQ5 Foundation, African HI Confederation, and Clarence Abogados and Associates. And today we are going to be discussing this webinar is part of the impact of the COVID in the social sector and economic in Africa. So today we are discussing reinventing relevant skill sets and capacities for sustainable diversification in Africa. And ladies and gentlemen, today I'm Mr. Alejandro Revuna. I'm Third Secretary of the Embassy of Equatorial Guinea in Cairo. And today I'm going to be the moderator of this session. With me today, I have Mr. John Glessy joining us from the UK. Mr. John Glessy, can you just raise your hand for people to know who you are, please? Thank you. And I have Mr. David Opong joining us from Ghana. Mr. David.
Hello.
And I also have Mr. Fabrice Nze joining us from Dakar, Senegal.
Hello.
And yes. And as I've already mentioned, questions for the debate today, and the main topic, reinventing relevant skill sets and capacities for sustainable diversification in Africa. So this webinar has 4 segments, and each segment has 3 to 4 questions. And I'm going to be answering, asking the question, sorry, and we'll be expecting some brilliant answers from my panelists today. And so the first segment is strengthening economic capacity in Africa, involvement in the economic activities for sustainable development, the role that Africans play in strengthening its workforce. So in this segment, I have 4 questions. Without any preference, I can start from the bottom, from the middle, or from the top. But I'm going to start from the first question for this segment. In your opinion, what are Africans' current point of involvement in labor activities to achieve the sustainable development of their economies? As we all know, in every society, we need the workforce to drive the economy. So that's one of the reasons this question is actually very important. In your opinion, can you tell us, the viewers, what are current points of involvement in labor activities to achieve sustainable development of the economies, what Africans can do? So I will start with Mr. David.
Okay. Thank you, Alejandro, for the question. We've made some strides, Africa as a continent, but it's not been holistic, actually. We can all attest to the fact that modern history has shown the effectiveness of industrialization in reducing or even eradicating poverty, owing to capacity expansion and building of opportunities and increased wages. I mean, no developed country did it without industrialization. So I think some African governments in this light have shown that they are on the right tracks. We can talk of in Ethiopia, in the town of Dukem, outside of Addis Ababa, where the authorities have, established an industrial zone, the first industrial park of its kind, which created more than 50,000 new jobs, And similarly in Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, among others, these countries are, investing in free zones, enclaves, where through industrialization, They are trying to open up the economy and, I mean, create more jobs to accommodate the workforce. So as I said, we are making some strides. I will give Africans 30 to 35%, especially the workforce. But my major problem is that it should be holistic. You know, we should strive at learning, trying to learn from each other, the African countries. I always say that the best person to teach Africans are Africans. So for instance, we all know that Nigeria has made a lot of strides in the field of manpower development, you know, when you talk about the oil and gas area, which most of us the other African countries are cannot, you know, emulate the policies that the Nigerians put in place to develop their manpower so much that they could possess a huge chunk of the industry in that country. So, as I said, the extent of involvement, I will give 30 to 35% involvement with workforce in Africa.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. David. But one of the major challenges I always have when it comes to workforce in Africa, we go to school, we acquire skills, but at the end of the day, those skills they don't trigger us to be inventive. So that's one of the challenges. We go to school, we acquire degrees, but are these degrees actually translating to wealth creation? So I will leave this here, and I would like to hear from Mr. John, who's joining us from, Mr. John Gillespie, who's joining us from the UK. Mr. John.
Thank you very much, moderator. And the comment you made after David's point there leads on. Your first question is about the involvement in labour activity. You actually have a second question here is, how should the African workforce be involved to achieve diversification of the African economy? And so your question sort of leads on to that second issue about what the African workforce should do. And so these first two questions, one is a macroeconomic situation, and the second one is really a specific response to, say, the issue you raised about education has been actually one of the success stories in the last 15, 20 years in Africa. And how does that success in education translate to vocation? So the macro sort of economic point of view is that, you know, sustainable development is very, very much founded on productive employment, and hence when people find work that yields a regular income, it's sufficient to meet the needs, and as well as being sufficient to meet the needs, can start building up savings, and that then develops a middle class. And this has to be sat alongside the fact that one has to combat poverty and identify the causes of large-scale unemployment, underemployment, and low productivity. And bearing in mind, I think it's around about 55% of Africa's population is currently under 18 years of age, and according to the UN, 70% of the next billion people born on the planet will be born in Africa. And this is a great opportunity in terms of sustainable development, but it's also a challenge because the cost of youth unemployment to economic and social development is extremely high. And bearing in mind, in many African countries, between 60 and 70% of the labour force is still employed in agriculture. Now, the agricultural sector, it doesn't matter where you are in the world, it's not specific to Africa. It just by its very nature has low levels of productivity that contribute to the overall aggregate output of a country. And of course, agriculture with, say, small producers, a lot of the local consumption, local market consumption, farming families, that economic production doesn't enter the final sort of national output measures of a country, whereas manufacturing industries and tertiary industries that employ far fewer people, they contribute to a relatively higher value added to the economy. So on that sort of macroeconomic point of view, I'd refer to, the International Labour Organization has made 3 sort of strong recommendations. So by the way, before I get to those 3 recommendations, it's very important to emphasize that women and girls are disproportionately affected, and there's a real need to have greater equity in that regard. And the manufacturing sector is still predominantly male dominated. Those labour recommendations is 1, increase the demand for labour to raise productivity and accordingly the incomes of working people. Integrate the socially excluded communities into the labour market and establish the protection mechanisms against any insecurity, and especially a focus on women. Remember, women are half the population, so have half the potential productivity there. And improving the terms in which African countries trade with richer countries to obtain investment finance. And all of that leads on to your point, that you made, Alejandro, about how do you make this specific for the African workforce to be involved in diversification? And my simple answer to that is entrepreneurship, preferably entrepreneurship with funding. And there's a lot, entrepreneurship should be simplified substantially. There's a huge amount of red tape and bureaucracy, even just in setting up a company. You should be anywhere in the world, Africa included. You should be able to go online and set up a limited company or a private partnership within half an hour online. Costs you $10. I can do that here in the UK. But many countries, and it's not exclusive to Africa, there's other parts of the world, where you have to go through so many departmental approvals. There isn't a one-stop shop. Why is this bureaucracy getting in the way of entrepreneurship? And then entrepreneurship comes with the most important thing, financing, funding. You must have funding mechanisms. And of course, it is difficult, the risk for banks, but governments can play an important role here, particularly in setting up business banks for society that can work with the local banks for small, medium-sized entrepreneurs to have access to loans. And another thing is greater development of peer-to-peer funding in the UK. The banks here are as much of a nightmare as they are anywhere else in the world. They give you an umbrella when the sun's shining. But we have for example, we have a system called Funding Circle. It's a peer-to-peer network. I don't know the numbers, but I'm sure it's in the sort of £3 or £4 billion has been raised in funding, and a small business can, maybe if it's $40, $50, $60,000 of that order, can within a matter of days, as long as they've got a good business proposal, go onto a peer-to-peer network, and people all around the country, they can choose. I'll put in $100, $500 into that, and you reach your target. And as long as it's well established and has the protections and the less necessary financial regulations and is supported with good governance, these funding mechanisms are in place. So from that macroeconomic point of view, to develop the African workforce in that diversification, entrepreneurship's the key.
Thank you very much, Mr. David. But listening to you, there are certain questions that came into my mind, and I'm glad that you mentioned funding. But another question is trust. How do people get access to this funding, and how do the bank trust them that after giving them money to start business, they are going to be able to pay back these loans if the government, as you mentioned, don't help to solve this situation? So this is going to be a topic that we are going to discuss further. But I will
say trust is always, a tricky one. But are we going to live in a completely risk-free society? No, people take risks. You refer to coronavirus at the beginning of this webinar. Are we all going to just stay locked up at home and not take risks? Risk management is part of the financial community. They know how to do it. They're professionals. And trust is actually not the issue. Risk management is the key.
But there also needs to be transparency. For example, if the government put funds to help small and medium enterprises, everybody must be able to have equal access to those funding.
Yeah, the examples I gave didn't involve any government money. If a government can establish a business bank and the other banks pool into that, that's still private sector. Peer-to-peer funding, which you can do online community, is again not government money. Yeah, you will find it very hard to have central government money for entrepreneurship when they have a responsibility to taxpayers. And taxpayers say, why are you spending $100 million on businesses that fail? That's a lot harder for government. But good governance of regulations, setting the environment and making it easy to do business and be an entrepreneur is the job of government.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. John. I appreciate it. I would like to hear the views from our next panelist, Mr. Fabrice, who is joining us from Senegal. Mr. Fabrice, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. I think with what Mr. Glassi and Mr. Opong have said is very much valid. I think in addition to that, what I would like to say is that education is the priority. I think you cannot have entrepreneurship alone to solve the problem of employment in Africa. Even entrepreneurs have to be skilled, and they need to get those skills somewhere. And I think this is probably where the role of the government is crucial, not by building schools, but by ensuring that the environment is conducive for private and public schools to be set up and to deliver the courses that will equip the individuals with the relevant skills, not to be necessarily employed, but to launch their businesses if they want to. So I think education throughout the life is a top priority in Africa. This is something that all countries, all governments should implement as #1 priority in the policies.
Thank you very much. I like what you mentioned, that education, but I also think that's why it's important to start also now the pre-technical skill schools where people can go and learn skills instead of going to university and any degree, because you can have 3 or 4 degrees and end up jobless. But if you learn a skill,
it is true. But you know what? I think skills are not necessarily the technical skills that you acquire. For example, in the US, even when you go to primary school, they teach you, you have financial literacy courses at primary school that teaches you how to manage money. You have public speaking courses. The students are trained to speak in public, and I think public speaking is one of the main skills that people should have throughout their life. Because how can you sell if you can't speak in public, if you can't still speak to 1, 2, or 3 people? So it is good to have vocational training to be able to learn new things technically. But I think what I was referring to is the more fundamental skills that should equip everyone, regardless of the technical skills that they may have. Whether you are a philosopher or writer, you need to be able, for example, to speak in public. So these are the basic skills that I'm referring to.
Okay, thank you. I would like to hear from Mr. David. Mr. David, you have something to say? Yes, Mr. David.
Yeah, Alejandro, I also wanted to add a little bit to the education part. I think if you analyze critically, we have a conceptual problem with our education, especially when it gets to the youth. I think it's time we try and refrain from the so-called good jobs that we have grown, good and noble professions that we have grown to think about. Because over the years, all it has ended us up is to be waiting home for government to employ us, and we are getting no jobs. I can make an example in Ghana. Over the years, all our universities have churned out graduates of the same caliber, just carrying files looking for jobs. One university comes about, I think the guy comes from the US and he tries to introduce something he, learned from the US here. It's called Ashesi University. And over about 10 to 15 years, almost 80% of the graduates from these universities have employed themselves. And we've had a lot of success stories from graduates from this Ashesi University. So I think we should be able to leave our comfort zones, okay? Explore new fields when it comes to our field of studies in the universities and the rest. We should explore new fields, agro-business, entrepreneurship, and the government also. They should, as my colleague Fabrice was saying, they should create the enabling environment. Government, together with industry, should create that environment to absorb these entrepreneurs after their school. We should open up to apprenticeship even, because in most of Africa, graduates frown at apprenticeships, But if you study a lot about the West, you can see even oil and gas, Opito, all of them, they all have apprenticeship programs. There is always a vocational route to every profession. It's not, we should change the perception of thinking about just going to university and getting degrees. We should think about what happens after the degree, what I can do for myself, because the government has never employed everybody in any country. There is no country where government employs everybody. And if we are able to change this perception and venture into, more inclusive, take more inclusive education, more good training, then we can come out. And even if we are not able to land jobs in the system already, we can create our own jobs and even employ other people.
Thank you very much, my dear panelists. I really appreciate your inputs and contribution regarding this question. I would like to move forward right now to the next question. The next question reads, considering that Africa are key players for the sustainable development and diversification of the economy, what is your opinion on external aid and development plans for Africa? Is it a real aid or an impediment for development? So I don't want to say anything regarding this question. I would like to hear 100% from you. And I will start with you, Mr. David, since you're already speaking.
Okay. Thank you, Alejandro. External aid, per se, it's not bad. Okay. But to answer your question, I still believe in the old Japanese proverb. Don't give me fish, but teach me how to fish. We in Africa, we must understand that there is no free lunch anywhere, okay? And think of other means of getting external help in a more dignifying way. For instance, in Ghana, the current government has a mantra that says Ghana beyond aid, which was highly applauded by almost the whole of Africa right from the beginning. It's not been easy, actually, because you can't just wake up overnight and change from an economy dependent on aid to one that doesn't. But it's achievable, actually, because over the past 3 years, we've had some successes in this light. We have some of our major donor partners, like the Danish government through Danida. Now they've succeeded in changing the approach from a donor relationship to a more partnership relationship. So it's to say that you convert the donor relationship to like a partnership, a trade relationship that will benefit both countries. And I think if we are able to succeed in this direction, the whole of Africa, then we shall be more dignified in accepting this help. We do not say we should refuse help or assistance or aid from the West or anywhere else. But what I am proposing, what I am recommending is help in the form of a partnership in trade, in education, in manpower development, something we can do together with the owner, with the donor, to benefit both countries. And by so doing, I believe that we shall be able to reach a point where we shall possess our economies.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fabrice, please.
I think I concur with what Mr. Okong said. And I would like to remind everyone that even Western Europe benefited from the American aid after the end of the Second World War. And that was what the Marshall Plan was all about. It was a massive aid plan by the US to help their allies after the end of the war. However, that aid, the Marshall Plan, didn't last for 50 years. At some point, and while they were getting aid, the Western countries, the Western European countries, managed to reduce their reliance on that aid. And I think aid in itself is not an impediment to African economic growth. It becomes an impediment only if African countries give the priority to the aid that they receive from foreign countries. And instead of relying on aid in priority, they should focus more on mobilizing domestic and regional resources, with the aid covering only the balance.
Thank you very much. I would like to hear from Mr. Glassie. Mr. Glassie, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, this is an ongoing debate, and the aid community, they know very well. This has been dealt with for many years, and what David said is correct. For some time now, the realization the aid is best successful in terms of development partnerships. And most of the agencies now, bearing in mind, and let's be realistic here, the predominance of the funding of agencies is Western Europe, North America, the countries like the Scandinavian countries David mentioned, like Denmark, France, UK, America, Japan, of course. But there are many countries in the world that don't have such models. I mean, wealthy countries, big oil companies, countries from the Gulf, for example. Most of the Chinese money is not aid or development money, it's loans. And then, of course, you've got to remember now that when people like DFID or DNIDA or USAID, most of it, it's very well coordinated, this funding, let's say through the World Bank or African Development Bank. So in the case of Ghana, and we're talking about education, there's a recent confirmation, Gallup, improving Ghana, improving learning outcomes program. I think it's around about 95 to 110 million dollars. Don't quote me. It's around, it's of that order. It's around about 100 million dollars for learning outcomes. That's all going ahead. It's World Bank funding. Why, money's so cheap at the moment. Interest rates are just slightly above zero, and it's not just aid money. It's development funding that the Ghana government or the Ghana Education Services can implement to improve learning outcomes. And that comes from a consortium of donors like DFID or Global Partnership for Education. And there's a growing, there's a great deal of responsibility now that an awareness within the aid and development sector of doing everything in the partnership format that David talks about. And you have to have the partnership and the buy-in of local stakeholders anyway. You can't just turn up in a country with a bag of money and say, here's my handout. It doesn't work like that. So, and it is a two-way street. I'll actually make a good, regarding aid, maybe, and here I'm in the UK, and we have a huge, big health crisis. Over 42,000 people have died from coronavirus in the last few weeks. We spend £135 billion a year on the National Health Service. I don't know the exact numbers. I will tell you, just Ghana alone, we have at least 7,000 to 9,000 Ghanaian nurses in the health service. We have over 1,000 Ghanaian doctors. How much does it cost to train a nurse? What, $30,000, $50,000? How much does it cost to train a doctor? $150,000, $200,000, all in all, if you add all the education. Now, those are people who've learned their skill in Ghana, and here they are in the UK. So has Ghana given us hundreds of millions of health aid? You could look at it like that. The fact is, this is a two-way street. A lot of the aid and development, it should be a partnership, and a lot of it relates to soft power. But I will also say, aid, it is an industry as well. It's a very big industry that employs a lot of people, and a lot of people across the continent work in this sector. So it's certainly not an impediment, but it needs good oversight, good management. And I think, I had real problems with the aid community as a whole 15, 20 years ago. But I think in the last decade, there have been some outstanding achievements, particularly in health and education and social infrastructures. So it's certainly not an impediment to development. It can enhance and support and improve international relations.
Anybody has anything to add to what Mr. Glasser said, or should we go straight to the next question? Okay, thank you. So the next question of this segment is basically a continuation of what Mr. Glasser said in his first intervention. Do you share that companies are a key piece for job growth and consequently for the sustainable development of the African economy? Mr. Glasser, I would like to start with you on this one.
Okay, I'm going to keep this brief because the answer is obviously, of course. But, and it comes with a big but, it must, going back to my point about entrepreneurship and the expansion of the SME, the small, medium-sized enterprise sector. Most developed economies, we're talking as much as 60 to 70% of the economy is SMEs. Small guys like me, we're running companies of 10 to 100 people. We're the engine of growth. We're the ones who do all the hard work. We're the ones who work 50, 60 hours a week. It's the SMEs drive the economy. And I'll give you two examples. In Nigeria, Dangote. Dangote is a monster, and it dominated more than 20% of the value of the Nigerian stock exchange is Dangote, one company. But it's even worse in Kenya. I think at the beginning of this year, I saw a report, Safaricom is more than 50% of the Nairobi Stock Exchange. I think it's about 2.2 trillion shillings in value. And Safaricom is worth more than all the other companies quoted on the Kenyan Nairobi Stock Exchange. And clearly, this is a lack of a good spread, a lack of diversification, a lack of having a strong SME market, and you can't have sustainable growth if you've got just a handful of monolithic companies and not a good spread of employment. So of course, to answer the question directly, of course, companies share as a key piece of job growth. And great kudos to Dangote, the likes of Dangote and Safaricom have done amazing. but there needs to be more and more private sector SME entrepreneurship and development for that to be a success.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fabrice.
I think it is true that entrepreneurship is, for me, is one of the solutions. If you have entrepreneurs, at some point, the entrepreneurs will need employees as well. So not everybody will become an entrepreneur. But I think it has to be very fluid, where you can be an entrepreneur one day and then go back to employment and later come back to entrepreneurship. And there shouldn't be any barriers from moving from one status to another. But I think, of course, companies are the key piece for job growth and the diversification of the African economy. However, I think that there must be a change in mindset within governments, because even though companies will be one of the key drivers, I think the policies implemented by the governments are also a critical piece. If you have the wrong policies that are not pro-employment, no matter what the companies do, no matter what the entrepreneurs want to do, no matter their ambition, the growth in employment in the country will be limited. So I think what I would say to government officials is to urge them to keep as a priority in their mind the employment impact of their policies. The same way nowadays, when you make an investment, the lenders, everybody ask you to consider the environmental impact of your investment. The same way, government officials should assess systematically the employment impact of the policies. Is it a pro-employment policy or is it not? Is it limited? And they should prioritize those that have a huge impact, a higher impact on employment. So this should become an essential part of their thinking process and their decision-making process.
Thank you very much. Mr. David, so do you share the ideas of Mr. Glacier and Mr. Fabrice?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in most African countries, the private and SME sector employs majority of their workforce. So definitely companies have a role to play. But the fact still remains, as Mr. Fabrice is saying, the enabling environment is very, very important. You know, no matter how good an entrepreneur you are, you will not survive in an economy without stable power and energy. Okay, you're going to spend your scarce capital on just trying to hang on to your business, just with financing power. So some of these factors, if the government gets it right, you know, local content participation policies to ensure employment, policies to build the capacity of the local businesses, then the SME sector can also take up the challenge and compete internationally. We've had some successes, especially in Ghana. Very minute companies grow into giant world-class oil and gas service providers over the past 10 years. And it's all because of a local content policy that encourages and includes these local businesses. So yes, companies really have a positive role to play.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for all your contributions on this segment of our webinar. I would like to move forward now to the second segment. The second segment talks about mechanism for strengthening and diversifying the African economy. The idea is to know how the efficiency of the African workforce and consequently the African economy can be increased. So in this segment, we have 4 questions, but because of time, I would like to answer 2 to 3 questions maximum on this segment. So I want to start with the first question. The first question is, what are companies doing to increase diversification of the African economy? Mr. David.
Okay, thank you once again, Alejandro. Diversification requires capital and a deliberate attempt to avoid putting all our eggs in one basket. For businesses and its owners have to open up a variety of sectors. Companies must stretch our tentacles, okay? We must spread our tentacles and dare to venture in other areas, varying our investment portfolios as companies or business owners, and constantly seeking fresh opportunities in gray sectors of the economy. By doing this, we can go a long way to diversify the continent's economy.
Thank you very much. I would like to hear from Mr. John Glessy.
Sorry, I will be brief on these because I do know these are quite sort of HR related questions, and it's not an area of expertise for me. I'll just say overall, in regard to the private sector, it plays a key role in advancing diversification. It drives innovation in underexploited sectors, research and development in new activities, and private companies, stand at the frontier of innovation and disruption. And actually, in the last few years, last 3 or 4 years, I'd say, Africa has seen substantial investment in non-resource-based sectors, especially tourism, financial services, and telecommunications. And the one thing I'd really point out to, in terms of companies for diversifying in the African economy as a whole, is the consumer market. Consumer goods are going to consumer goods, banking, and telecommunications. I think there was a report. So currently the overall sub-Saharan African economy, I think, is around about $2.6 trillion in output. And it's reckoned in the next few years, just those goods, consumer goods, banking, telecommunications, could generate an additional $1.5 trillion in revenues. And consumer goods are certainly African economies, in my view, and companies have the opportunity to adjust to the needs of the consumer class, because that's where the rate of return on investment is much higher. And so I see great opportunities in that sector. And of course, telecommunications has been a major success story.
Thank you very much. Before I go to Mr. Fabrice, I would like to remind our viewers that you can start sending your questions now in the question and answer section. So at the end of this panel, we can ask the panelists to answer some of the questions you send to us. Thank you very much, Mr. Fabrice. I would like to hear from you.
Well, I think what companies can do to increase the diversification of the African economy is to invest. But like Mr. Opong said, you need capital to invest, either self-generated cash flows, or you have to raise equity from investors, or you have to raise debt from banks. Maybe the banking route is the more common one in the African context, and therefore it should be good to encourage banks and microfinance institutions to lend more to the private sector, to the entrepreneurs. What I noticed with very much interest is the rise of venture capital and especially angel investors in Africa. I'm not saying that angel investors in some form didn't exist in Africa, of course. However, there is a new trend whereby employed people with enough capital are now more willing to invest and take some risk in startups, to fund startups, as opposed to investing all their money in real estate, for example. So this is something that should be encouraged because investing in startups spurs innovation, not only technological innovation, but innovation across the board. And this is something that should be encouraged by, again, government policies. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. But as I want to just add something regarding this topic. As we keep saying, we have to invest, we in the private sector, and we all know what is happening in Africa when it comes to the private sector. It's very difficult for a young African entrepreneur to start his business, because we know if he goes to the bank will ask so many things, so many collaterals. At the end of the day, he can have the loan to start his business. But we know today, a Lebanese comes to Africa today with the short trousers, with slippers on, walks to the bank and gets the money. Why do our bank don't trust our young guys? So that's one of the major concerns I have when it comes to venturing into business in Africa, because it seems like the banks don't trust us enough. So I would like to move to the next question.
Mr. Ivuna, sorry, if I may. Being a former banker, I have to say that when banks launched in Africa historically, it was to cater for large corporates or the state. It was not really to serve the indigenous companies, the indigenous entrepreneurs. So it set the mindset right from the beginning. And it's only in the 80s and 90s that things started to evolve, where we had indigenous banks with decision makers having in mind the potential of African entrepreneurs and African corporates. So things are starting to change, but it has to change at all levels. You have to relax maybe the regulatory environment that is imposed on the commercial banks by the central banks. So if the commercial banks have to follow stringent rules imposed on them by the regulator, of course, it's going to be very difficult for them to take more risks with local companies. So something has to be done at the central bank level. But again, if you want to lend to an individual, to an entrepreneur, you need to be able to get repaid. And in the event that the entrepreneur cannot repay you, you need to have access to collateral to recover your loan. So the lack of credit bureaus in many African countries is an issue, because therefore you cannot assess the risk of the borrowing applicant. So again, these are policies that must be put in place by governments to make sure that the environment again is conducive conducive for growth. We talked about a conducive environment for employment. Now we're talking about a conducive environment to spur the entrepreneurship spirit in the continent and investments.
Thank you very much. Moving to the next question. A strong and prosperous continent is essential for the sustainable global economy that we intend to build. In this line, most African governments have prioritized creating a conducive environment as a favorable ecosystem for African companies. In your opinion, how much has been achieved? How much remains to be done So I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Fabrice, regarding this question.
I think it would be a lie to say that the environment is not more conducive today than it was 20 years ago. A lot of progress has been made. However, we were coming from afar. So therefore, we shouldn't stop our efforts. I think it's a continuous effort. Even the US continuously try to improve their environment to remain competitive globally. So in our context, the journey to being more competitive never stops. It's not because a government has managed to streamline the process to set up a company from 2 months to 15 minutes that the journey is over. Then they must move on to something else to make the environment even more conducive, constantly more conducive. So I think it is important to remind ourselves that if you don't move forward because the others move forward, then you go backwards.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glessy. Do you think African governments have done enough?
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, and this does relate to human resources as well. I don't know how qualified I am to answer this specifically. So my only general answer is, every government can do more to make a more conducive business environment. As an entrepreneur myself, my attitude is nobody's going to help me, no bank's going to help me, and the last people in the world who are ever going to help me is the government. So I'm just going to crack on. But what they can do, governments, is they can hinder. They can get in the way. And that's why I earlier referred to bureaucracy, red tape, cumbersome. One of my big bugbears, I do a lot of transfer of materials to Africa, to and from Africa, is customs. Customs is a nightmare. It's a real, I don't know why it's such a problem. I don't know why it's such a difficult thing that, the reform of customs procedures and the loosening of administrative burdens for trade, it is essential for manufacturers to export their products and import their goods. If there were two things that really bugged me, there's one is customs and the cost of ICTs, cost of internet connectivity in Africa. The poorest countries in the world are paying the highest rates for connectivity and data, and this is bonkers situation. If the governments can act to have greater equity in certainly in this digital economy that we live in now, and act to leverage the internet infrastructure to is much more fairly priced, and really push hard, a massive drive to do something about reforming customs, then that will make a world of difference to trade and a conducive business environment.
Thank you. Mr. David?
Okay. First of all, I would like to give some credit to the various African governments in this light, especially in Ghana. I can speak well about Ghana because this is where I grew up. The late 80s and early 90s, you needed to be some age to own a company in Africa. You needed to look matured. You needed to be, quote unquote, old to run a company. Now, at least there is opportunity in the system. We've had very young CEOs. We have very young people, startups, and they've been successful. As John said, the government is not doing much to aid us, but at least they are not impeding us from our success. So I will give some credit to them. So that's where we are. But for how far we have to go, I think we still have a long way to go in terms of regulation, okay? The banks are still doing their thing. In Ghana, for instance, we complained by inaccessibility of loans and to the government tried. Hello?
Yes, Mr. David, we can hear you.
Yeah, I had some interruption, sorry. So as I was saying, the banks related with the microfinance companies. So they said, okay, our processes are so cumbersome. Okay, go to microfinance. They give the money to microfinance and it's easy, but the interest rate is very high. So you come back to square one. This is what we talk about, the enabling environment, okay? Secondly, we still have the issue of our government, our politicians trying to have their stakes in business also. You get a contract, you are executing, there's a change in government, and someone needs interest. And so you are not on this list and you are off. We are trying to go beyond some of these things. Fine, the commissions have been set up, the regulators are trying, we keep complaining, we keep complaining. We will continue complaining actually. And we hope that someday we will have more opportunities in the system. Someday we will be able to say that now we are having fair business practices in Africa and all entrepreneurs are able to benefit from the environment.
Thank you very much. I have to, before I end this segment and go to the next one, I have to add something regarding to what Mr. Grace is saying. I have to agree with him. The customs and the taxes in Africa are incredible. And I think, in my personal opinion, I think they are ridiculous. Because they have, as you say, how can you pay so much in trying to register a company, a limited company? And I would like to say something here. For so many years, it was difficult in Equatorial Guinea to register a company, but recently, since last year, they have this single window where you go, you do all your registration, and in a matter of 7 days, you have your company registered, and with a minimum capital of 100,000 CFAs, which is around roughly $200. So I would like to say kudos to Equatorial Guinea because it was very difficult, and also this local partner was very also an impediment for the foreign direct investment into Africa. Some countries that have the law, you need a local partner to register your business or to start business in certain countries. So we Africans have done a lot, but we still have a long way to go. So I want to thank you, gentlemen, for all your contributions and input in this segment. And I would like to move forward to the next segment of our webinar today, which is the diversification and sustainable development in Africa, transformation toward models of economy and sustainable societies. And in this segment, I have 3 questions. I will, because of time, I will only take 2. So the first question in this segment will be for you, Mr. David. What kind of development and promotional strategies should be carried out for economic diversification and job creation in order to transform a rapid economic growth into sustained and inclusive development? Mr. David, we can hear you. Your microphone.
You hear me now?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much once again, Alejandro. I think we just have to revisit what we have kept saying about the enabling environment, the training, and the manpower preparation, okay? If we talk about development, we know that it doesn't happen overnight, okay? It's a process. And every process needs to be well organized and well implemented. The government has a part to play. Industry has a part to play. The education sector. We shouldn't continue on with the way we've done things over so many years and expect to have different results now. If we really want to be able to achieve the development we are talking about, we should embark on a complete reform process of most sectors of our economy and our lifestyle. The education, for instance, talking about the manpower. If anybody has ever run a company in Africa and dealt with local manpower, there are a lot of challenges you go through. Some about perception, some are attitudinal, okay, some training. Sometimes you get so frustrated in trying to get your workforce to give you the right results, okay? And it seems we've been like that for so long, such that it has become the norm. For instance, for some time now, I've always complained about the attitude of the Ghanaian worker, the attitude of our workforce. And I sat down and looked, and I realized it is coming from our labor policies. Most African countries are coming out of quote unquote socialist or communist, beginnings. So our HR policies way back then are not favorable for foreign corporate policies. It was like we all for the employee and nothing for the employer. It's like we have HR policies that seek to pamper the employee. Workers feel they have a stake in the company. And we have a form of policy that rewards people not taking into consideration their performance. I think we should be able to embark on a complete change of some of these things. We should sit down, plan some reforms, and develop the human attitude, our human capital, to the level that we will be productive. If we don't do that, we can do whatever, the government can put whatever policies, but our companies, our local entities will not be productive. And we will not be able to see the kind of socio-economic development that we are talking about. The impact on our environment, that's the environmental sustainability that we put on the regulators. Almost every country has an environmental protection agency. We have so many policies in our laws, so many good laws, so many procedures that you have to follow to execute one task as a business in the African environment. But what do we see? The monitoring is the problem. The regulators are not monitoring, and there are so many ways of cutting corners to achieve your gains. Then businesses, on the other hand, are looking for profitability. So if the government agencies do not monitor, then people will continue going about their businesses with the sole aim, so selfish aim of making profit. And that, coupled with our unproductive workforce, I'm afraid we will not be able to achieve the development we are looking for.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glessy.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. Yeah, in general, of course, economic diversion, it's the potential to increase Africa's resilience and contribute to the long-term sustainability that we're talking about today, and the necessity of having a broad-based economy which is active across sectors. But at the same time, if you expand the expansion of activities in underdeveloped sectors, or indeed the development of new activities, that's also a significant challenge, and it requires combined efforts by African governments. And I think there should be, which we haven't mentioned here, the opportunity for regional partnerships between African governments, regional purchasing powers. Maybe you have groups of countries which are smaller economies, but when they come together as a group, then they have a much more, the main, like the SADC region or the East African Community or or the West African Economic Community, these countries together can have more purchasing power and strength. And as we've referred to quite a number of times today, that conducive business environment and responsible management of natural resources that David refers to as well, and good governance are indispensable. But fundamentally, diversification, it doesn't occur in a vacuum. It needs that enabling environment. It needs investment, it needs trade industrial policies, it needs growth performance, it needs macroeconomic stability, a competitive exchange rate, these kind of things that are necessary. And most importantly, and I think as Fabrice referred to at the beginning, is the drivers of productivity are education, training, and skills enhancement. You know, strong skills base, it promotes productivity and employment through, actually there was a question on the chat here. Somebody asked what are the name 5 skills. I've answered a few, Fabrice has answered a few. I think we both come up with, well, communication skills. I put adaptability at the top. And adaptability to change and the capacity to innovate. That's fundamental in enabling workers to become more enterprising and competitive. And done in conjunction with what we haven't mentioned so far is the international context, which is, of course, increasing relevance for African economies in terms of diversification. The partnerships with big economies like the European Union, the US, China, India, Japan, they take many forms, and there's growing joint business ventures and investments and technology transfers that have been success stories in recent times. Even the US government has the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, whereby there's a removal of import duties and quotas to allow countries to export a wider range of products to the US. And 90% of products from Africa fall into just 3 main categories: energy-related, textile, and transportation equipment. And so good governance, rule of law, and greater engagements with the international community, and getting over the problems, as I referred to, the high cost of importing and exporting, which is leading to lengthy time delays and a cumbersome administrative process. And that discourages people from expanding their product base in the first place.
Thank you very much. I would like to hear from Mr. Fabrice.
I think both David and John have said it all. Just to follow up on what John said about adaptability, and I fully agree. I think it has become quite uncommon, except maybe in the public administration, that somebody now joins one employer and stays with the same employer throughout their professional life. So even if you stay in the same field, moving from one company or one employer to another one will require adaptability, let alone if you change jobs. So you need to maintain your fitness, I would say, in terms of new environment, new corporate culture, new set of skills. And this goes back to what I referred to before when I mentioned lifelong education. I think after graduation, after university, this is not over in terms of learning, in terms of self-education. The youth today have to realize that this is something that they will have to keep doing, and there is no excuse anymore. There are so many MOOCs available online that if somebody says, you know, I don't know how to do it, it's really because they don't want to put their mind into it. But just to come back to your question about the kind of development and commercial strategies that should be carried out for economic diversification and job creation, for me, if I was a decision maker and I had to put the emphasis on something, I would do it on the three following areas. One, education. Second, SMEs, and I put entrepreneurship into SMEs. And second, industrialization. Even when the market is small, and Alejandro, you know what I'm talking about in terms of small market with EG and Gabon, we are small. But even so, there is some industrialization that can take place. But we shouldn't simply copy what Ghana would do, for example. We should think about the industrialization process based on our natural resources, our natural advantages. For you, it could be oil and gas. For Gabon, it could be mining. It could be forestry. For Ghana, it would be something else. But industrialization can take place in all countries. So these are the three areas basically where I would put my my focus on if I were in a position to make a decision.
Thank you very much. Bottom line, I think there still need some. We still need some more political and economic actions so that Africa can achieve its full potential and development. Gentlemen, I would like to move forward to the next segment since these questions have already answered the other two questions I have in this segment. So I would like to move forward to the segment 4 of our webinar. Segment 4, the future of jobs, skills, education, and training in Africa. With more than 60% of its population under the age of 25, the sub-Saharan Africa is the youngest region in the world. By 2030, the continent working age population is set to increase by 2/3, from 370 million adults in 2010 to more than 600 million in 2030. So the questions, there are compelling reasons to think that development aid cannot be the engine of change, considering that Africa is the youngest region of the world. What do you think should be done to engine, what do you think should be the engine of change, Mr. Fabrice?
Well, I think you set the tone, let's say, about the challenge and the opportunity that Africa faces. And what you mentioned, you alluded to the challenge and the opportunity of the demographic dividend. So basically, we have a lot of youth. The African population is very young. Like John said, in the future, I think 70%, John Expert said 70% of the new born in the world will be African. So this creates an opportunity, which is the youth of the population and of the workforce potentially. However, the challenge is that you need to provide employment to all those young people. Otherwise, we are going to face a lot of social crisis in the future because of the unemployment of those youth. So that's the major challenge. Now, between the three major economic sectors that we have, agriculture / natural resources from one hand, industrialization from another hand, and services from the last hand. Where do we think that we can to absorb the demand for work of that youth? And I think it's not going to be in services. There's so much that you can do, and at some point, in order to buy services, you need to have generated some wealth somehow. Natural resources, yes. Agriculture, yes, it will employ, but we all know that a mining company doesn't employ so many people. Okay, I'll give you the example of the largest mining company in Gabon. It's been there for 60 years. Its revenue is more than 1 billion euros. Nonetheless, it employs only 2,000 people maximum. If you take an oil and gas company, it's even less because the process is so capital intensive that you don't require a huge amount of labor. Agriculture, yes, but because agriculture is going to be more and more intensive, more and more mechanized, is going to need less and less people to employ. Therefore, what's left? It's industrialization. And we come back to the same issue. Africa needs to industrialize faster, to not only because it needs it, but because it will be a way to employ more youth that are coming to the market.
Thank you very much, Mr. Glesi.
Okay, thank you very much, Alejandro. And I'm going to help sort of answer the two questions in one here. One about, you know, the engine of change, because I think it's a fairly short answer, and also the appropriate, you put projects to drive that change, to achieve the goals. First, and also I'll refer to what you said. I was in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea this time, well, February, March last year, when the one-stop shop was set up. So due respect to the Ministry of Economy, Finance and Planning, which did a great job. It will make a difference in EG. The development aid is not an engine of change. We've referred to that earlier, and there has been great improvements in that area. What's the engine of change? Simple, one-word answer is innovation. And but I'll expand on that, and I'll maybe contradict what I just said earlier about, because to innovate you have to have skills. And I referred to earlier about the broad-based diversification, which is necessary. But at the same time, any country, especially now, where, what are you going to do? Are you going to compete with China in the textile or the steel making industries in the secondary sectors? No chance. Apart from the cheap labor, there's the sheer capacity. There's no chance of doing that. And African governments and most African societies have realized that. So they've looked, for example, at leapfrogging secondary industries, and ICTs have become a big thing. But has this got any direction? Let's have another the Silicon Oasis, I think, in Egypt, in Kenya, they've got Silicon Safari, Rwanda, Senegal. Every country wants to be an ICT, next Silicon Valley, an African version of Silicon Valley, which, bear in mind, not even one European country has emulated Silicon Valley. All the biggies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, you name them, all American. So I would say, instead of just having this general, let's be ICT superstars, you must have the successes in clusters. And that is, say, in manufacturing clusters or in higher end design and production clusters, where the specialization comes, where the rest of the world wants a piece of what you've got. You're so good at what you do, everybody else wants a piece of it. So everybody else wants a piece of Silicon Valley because they're so good at what they do, but they have an enormous amount of failure before they get there. Remember that as well. And so and so it's sort of contradictory. At the same time, you've got to have a broad-based economy for the necessary diversification and growth. But you do, the success of economies is in clusters as well, and specializing in those clusters. We talk about skills. Skills is specialization. And take the UK, for example, which its manufacturing base has collapsed completely. It's I don't know, 10, 13% of the economy. It's not a huge amount, maybe more, maybe about 13, 14%. But it's very, and it can't, there's no chance, as I say, competing with China in clothes making or steel making or all these secondary industries. But basic high-end pharmaceutical and biotechnology has a really successful cluster, world-class in that. So my thoughts on this, for answering sort of two questions in one here for you, for for the looking at the engine of change and the you say projects. I would say innovate, develop skills. Maybe we'll close on those technical and vocational skills. That is the last question, and promote investment in clusters. Even if you're successful, if say Zimbabwe becomes successful in a high value sector, let's say environmental technologies that employs 10,000 people in the end. 10,000 people getting a job in that sector creates 100,000 jobs in the hinterland, the people who service and support that sector. So although I've talked about diversification and broad-based economies, I think a great deal of success will become in specialization in conjunction with that diversification, because you have to be able to say to the rest of the world, I've got something that the rest of you want, so come and get it, and I can charge more money because I'm the best at it.
Thank you very much, Andy. Mr. Glassie, I would like to hear from Mr. David regarding this question.
Yes. First of all, I would like to talk about a well-trained and developed workforce to embark on a massive industrialization drive and also attract foreign companies. We have, most countries in Africa have a lower minimum wage as compared to countries elsewhere. So I think if we are able to develop and train our workforce well, and we have the human capital is huge. If we are able to train this capital, we can even be able to compete with some of the Asian countries in terms of human capital. We see in Africa everywhere, we see people from Asia, Indians, we see Filipinos coming to work here. Meanwhile, we have the workforce here. What don't they have? They don't have the requisite training. So countries should embark on this drive to train them. Secondly, we should try and strengthen our local SMEs. And this, I would like to ask, what do we have in our hands? Our extractive companies, our extractive industries, the gold, the oil, the silver. That is what we have. And I believe if we are to achieve anything, we should start from there. We should try and build our local companies from the proceeds of these resources. We should try and encourage participation, heavy, massive participation of the local companies to enable them capitalize and so that we can even get to the point of Africa trading amongst ourselves. And to trading amongst ourselves, here I would like to refer to the African Intercontinental Free Trade Agreement that has been signed. I would like to urge all African countries, all Africans to support this agreement and try to get it right, because I believe if we are able to trade effectively among ourselves, Africa is a market on its own. If you are in any of these countries, Ghana, Nigeria, if you get close to the harbors and you see that the number of containers that are coming in every day from Asia, coming in every day from Europe, coming in every day from America, you acknowledge the fact that without Africa, most of these industries out there will collapse. So why don't we harness these markets ourselves? If there is something we can produce in Ghana and ship to Nigeria, why don't we do it? If there is something that is in high demand in Nigeria and we have it in excess in Equatorial Guinea, why don't we trade among ourselves? Why do we prefer sending our raw materials outside this continent whilst we have the market locally here? So intercontinental trade is also one. And last but not the least, I would like to talk about a well-managed immigration program for professionals in Africa. We have the likes of Philippines making millions of dollars every year from foreign workers, because those people are not going outside through the deserts. They are going out through a well-planned immigration program. First of all, the government ensures that they are well-trained, well-standard, that they can compete on any level with any other nation. And then they try to register every professional in the country, then go out there and try and break deals, put agents in foreign countries and get the Filipino labor there. I think we can also make a lot of money from this industry. our biggest asset in Africa is the people. I think everybody will believe, everybody will bear with me. So why don't we develop that asset and use it to the benefit of all?
Thank you very much, Mr. David. I would like to stay with you on this next question so that we close our webinar so that we can go and answer some questions from the audience. Do you think that the current plans for education and training of companies and Pan-African institutions are in line with the real needs of the population?
To some extent, I will say no, because most companies know the deficiency in regulation on this continent, and they capitalize on that to just put in programs just to fulfill permits acquisition requirements. Let me expatiate a little bit on that. If you, all over Africa, almost every country has some form of local content policy for a foreign company establishing in our extractive industry. And these are incorporated in the procedures leading to the award of their permits. Ask me, how many follow-ups do the government, the regulators do to ensure that these companies, after being awarded their permits, are following this technology transfer plans to the letter?
Zero or nothing.
Zero or nothing. You have a country engaged in oil and gas activities for years, but if you go and assess the level of local participation with respect to manpower, you will see they are not even up to 20%. Day in, day out, put different kinds of policies, try to use immigration, try to use work permits, but you still see the companies going around it. We have to understand that it's normal. The investment is coming from there, and they would like to sustain the economies from which the investments are coming from. So there is nothing wrong with African countries making what we will call, quote unquote, protectionist policies or laws just to ensure the development of their people. Everybody has it. I always tell people, if you go to US, they have the Jones Act, they have a lot of acts just to keep their jobs within and keep the manpower trained. The UK has it, Europe, everywhere there is. Asia. Why is it that when it is Africa alone, we tend to frown on it and we feel like it's something that is awkward? No. African leaders, the government should take this serious. It is only through this that we can really uplift our people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fabrice. What do you think? Do you think the current plan for education and training companies?
Sorry, say it again.
Do you think that the current plans for education and training of companies and Pan-African institutions are in line with the real needs of the population?
No, totally not. Totally not. I think we need to expand, we need to accelerate, we need to increase the size, we need to improve the quality, and until we do so, I think we're going to, our growth is going to be suboptimal, and much less than what our potential should normally get. So I think we need to do much more. It's going to require a mix of state intervention and private sector investment, but we are still very far from just the minimum of what we should be doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. John.
Okay, I'll try and keep this brief, Alejandro, because I've been working in education in Africa for more than 10 years now. So I'm very passionate about this, and I could say a lot, but I'll get to the point. In terms of the technical education and training that the question refers to, you have to bear in mind, because of high levels of youth unemployment, there's quite a lot of political pressure in governments. What are we going to do? We've got to give people jobs. We've got, 25, 30% unemployment within this age group. And so technical vocational education and training, the institutes, different types of technical colleges, there's a lot of political pressure to have these. And this is not, David referred to at the beginning of this, having a holistic view. You can't panic yourself into trying just to solve the job problem with technical vocational education and training, because actually traditionally it comes from the German model, who are very successful at it. You know, but Germany's a different economy. Germany has a production line of world-class engineers, automotive. It has the best automotive industry in the world. But what's the point of developing technical or automotive skills in Mozambique or Zambia or wherever where there isn't any car manufacturing? So there are two, I'd say from a national point of view, there are just two fundamental principles to stick to when education and training. You talk about education and training companies, actually, it's a really, an institute, it's a relatively undeveloped area. Most of the technical training is government-led across the continent. But there are two fundamental guides for directing policy here. One is the current state of your national economy, having a needs assessment of what you have in your economy, in your primary, secondary, and tertiary industries, and from that needs assessment, where are the gaps that need filling? A gap analysis. Where can jobs come in? So you are making training fulfill your current needs. And the second fundamental guideline is the aspirations of the country, and that refers to what we've talked about earlier in terms of innovating, diversification, and clustering. Whatever education and training you're going to do must also, apart from fulfilling current needs, must also match the aspirations. If you want to become good, excel in this sector as a nation, or as a group of nations, intercontinental, as David refers to, then you need to, before going into just having education and training of any kind of vocation, it must match the aspirations and the direction of the country. And that's not just a government thing, that's all stakeholders and civil society. So TEVET skill, the vocational skills are important, but be wary, be careful not to make the mistake of just falling into a political trap, that this is a quick solution, a quick fix to dealing with unemployment. You must have the necessary needs assessment in the country, and the country itself or the region must have aspirations that you can then fulfill with the necessary skills.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I would like to come to the conclusion of this, our webinar, and go directly to the questions and answers from our viewers all over the world. We have 2 questions only unanswered, because out of the many questions, my panelists have already answered some on their question and answer section. So I want to ask these questions to you, Mr. John. What are African companies doing in order to hire qualified Africans already working abroad in order for them to relocate? You say him, for example, he's been looking for a job in Equatorial Guinea for 2 years now in the industry. So what do you think?
Okay, as I said, I think this refers also, you didn't ask specifically straight out the question, what in your preparation notes here, what prevents companies from placing Africans in strategic positions instead of foreigners? And yes, maybe the chap, Juan Hersuma, who wrote this question,
yes, this
kind of frustration.
That question.
Yeah, I'm not, and maybe Fabrice is better placed to answer this. I'm not a human resources expert. There's nothing prevents companies from placing Africans, nothing preventing it at all. And maybe the government should have, and I think Dave referred to it, immigration or work permit policies that say, okay, if you're going to fill a job with a foreign applicant, then you must guarantee us that you cannot find that person with the necessary skill sets and experience in our country already, which you probably can. I'm a CEO, so what? You don't have to be that smart to be a CEO. You don't even have to be qualified at all. There's a lot of illusion about this, and I think African companies definitely should be doing more. But this is the key. The key to answer Wan Asum, and I think key to successful development, is not just about employment and not about just getting a job. The success is if governments, in terms of like you have with the one-stop shop, can motivate entrepreneurship, but really increase productivity and be successful through employee ownership and employee participation. It doesn't have to be 50, 60% of the company. It might be 20, 30% of the company that employees, even if you own 100% of the company, it doesn't mean anything. 100% of nothing, still nothing. But if you own 1% of 10 million, you're worth 100,000. And if you have 20 employees all own 1% each, you've got 20 that's 20%. You've got 20% highly motivated employees who do a damn sight more work for you than a 20% equity investor. So I would say that African governments should encourage, apart from encouraging companies to fulfill local positions with local indigenous people, of course, but should also come up with these models that incentivize to increase employee ownership and participation, because that will ultimately lead to a successful companies. Your chap here, he's been looking for work in Equatorial Guinea for 5 of the last 2 years. And I do know, Alejandro, Equatorial Guinea has a massive bias of good jobs in government. And I know you've built up this one-stop shop. There isn't a huge private sector base, and it needs to develop in EG considerably. And I'm sure that's some of the frustration that Juan has come to face. I just think over time, Equatorial Guinea needs to do that. But, easy or well-paid, super well-paid government jobs maybe shouldn't be the easy fallback. I better not get any more political than that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fabrice. What prevents companies from Africa placing Africans in a strategic position instead of foreigners? This go in line to what Mr. Juan Asumu asked. What is the problem?
To be honest, I'm not sure that the situation today is the same as it was, I don't know, even 20 years ago. I don't have the data to back it up, but I have some anecdotal evidence. And I will tell you about the country where I come from, which I know better. If you take the Total Gabon, which is the subsidiary of Total from France, the first oil and gas producer in Gabon, they appointed the first African CEO of the company. I think it was in 2012, 2013. And that's a guy who had done his entire career within the Total group in Europe. And then when he left after 5 or 6 years, they appointed another African. So that's one example. Let me go back to the mining company I mentioned earlier, Comilog. Comilog had its first local as a CEO back in 1980. So after a hiatus of maybe 10 years, during which the CEO was a French guy, against for the last 3 years, the CEO has been a Gabonese. So I don't think that it is definitely true that companies are not appointing Africans as their CEOs or in strategic positions. I think when you appoint a CEO, you need to have some trust in him or in her, And so therefore, you need to spend time knowing the person, and this is the case the larger the company is. And a third example to back up my assertion that I think we've made a lot of progress is lies in the existence of recruitment firms, and one is Search, which was launched 15 or 20 years ago by DG Equity with the specific purpose of recruiting talented, educated Africans who wanted to move back to Africa. And Search is involved in identifying and recruiting Africans in senior positions for many of the clients in Africa. So I don't think that it is true. You find more and more Africans at the top of companies. You can see it in the banking sector, in the insurance sector, oil and gas sector, even mining sector. So I think we have made a lot of progress with regard to that issue.
Thank you very much, Mr. David. Your last contribution to this panel before we close the day. Your microphone, please.
I do agree with what Mr. Fabrice is saying to a large extent. It's better now, actually. It's better. In some instances, there's the lack of expertise and experience, okay? But in general, I've realized that in most of the projects we do in Africa, especially what we undertake with government and foreign partners, there is more concentration on the contracts leading to the execution of the project than the manpower development. It always comes at the tail end of it, either in the form of corporate social responsibility or local content. So you have the situation whereby the project is supposed to take off, but there was no succession plan. There is no one trained enough to relieve the experts. In this case, then you cannot say that there is a conscious effort not to place the locals or the Africans in strategic positions. What I would advise the governments in Africa to do is to plan the manpower development ahead. If you have a project that you wish to undertake in the next 10 years, the best thing to do is to start sending people out to fill in the gaps now, so that by the time the project is ready, your guys are ready. Okay, you don't finish, then you say, I'm doing, how do we always call it a technology transfer plan, we call it a local content development plan, when the project has already taken off. Literally, what you are saying is that, okay, train my guys, and when they are okay, you get off. And between you and I, it's very difficult for most people to do that. Okay, so the best approach will be to train your local content before the project even takes off. Train them, arrange industrial attachments, arrange employments in other industries, related industries outside your country, whether on the African continent or even outside for them, so that when the project is to take off, whichever HR company is handling it, you send them a list of this guy is qualified as this, he has this appraisals from this company and that, so that there will be no excuse to refuse them or delay your people from rising.
Okay, staying with you, Mr. David, I would just like to shape in this question. Why is it difficult for governments to generate economic diversification using the African know-how?
Well, it's unfortunate that most of our governments are still depending on the much needed foreign aid. Okay, and you and I know that these aids sometimes come with conditions. They are not aid through and through. For instance, the Chinese loans come with a condition that you contract a lot of manpower from China and all that, okay? So if you are depending on this for your development, then you will be restricted in the ability to apply African know-how.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. We come to the end of our session today. I want to thank each and every one of you, starting from you, Mr. David Apong Ajay from Ghana. Thank you for joining us today. From Mr. John Glassy from the UK, thank you for joining us, and having Mr. Fabrice Nze Bakale joining us from Senegal. Thank you very much for taking your time and of your busy agendas to joining us today to share your ideas, your views regarding human resources, diversification, and job creation in Africa. Before I end this session, I want to read this quote for all the young people out there looking for a job and everybody that wants to start. You learn more from failure than success. Don't let it stop you. Failure builds characters. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was nice having you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.